I never thought splitting firewood would land me in legal trouble. But there I was on a Tuesday afternoon in Pine Ridge, Colorado, watching two police officers walk up my driveway while I stood next to my hydraulic log splitter. My name is Lucas Emerson, and I had just moved into this neighborhood 6 months ago. The house was perfect, a 3-bedroom ranch on 2 acres with plenty of space for my workshop, and more importantly, enough land to process the firewood I used to heat my home during Colorado's brutal winters. I had grown up in Boulder, where my father taught me the value of self-sufficiency. Cutting and splitting my own wood wasn't just economical, it was a tradition I had no intention of abandoning. The officers approached with that cautious walk they all seemed to have, hands near their belts, eyes scanning the property. I shut off the log splitter and pulled off my work gloves. "Afternoon, officers. Something I can help you with," the taller one, whose name tag read Martinez, nodded. "We received a noise complaint from your HOA. A Mrs. Patricia Cunningham called it in. Says you've been running loud machinery for hours every day this week." I felt my jaw tighten. Patricia Cunningham. I should have known. The woman had introduced herself the day I moved in, showing up with a clipboard and a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was the HOA president, a title she wielded like a weapon. Within that first conversation, she had managed to inform me of 17 different rules I needed to follow, most of which seemed designed to prevent anyone from actually living on their own property. "Officers, I've been splitting firewood. It's 2 in the afternoon on a weekday." I checked the county noise ordinances before I started. Daytime hours allow for construction and maintenance activities. The second officer, a shorter woman named Rodriguez according to her badge, glanced at the log splitter. "How long have you been running it today?" "Started around 9 this morning. Took a lunch break from noon to 1. Been back at it for about an hour." Martinez looked around the property. "Mind if we take a sound reading?" "Not at all. Actually, I'd appreciate it." I watched as they went back to their patrol car and returned with a decibel meter. Rodriguez held it at various distances while I restarted the log splitter. The machine hummed and hissed as it pushed a wedge through a thick piece of pine. The meter registered readings in the mid-70s decibel range at the property line nearest to Patricia's house. Martinez showed me the reading. 76 decibels at the closest point. County ordinance allows up to 90 during daytime hours, which are defined as 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. "So I'm not breaking any laws?" "No, sir. You're well within your rights." Martinez looked almost apologetic. "We still have to document the call, but there's no violation here." After they left, I tried to get back to work, but my concentration was shot. I had about 3 cords of wood to process before winter, and I was already behind schedule. The logs had been delivered 2 weeks ago, and they weren't going to split themselves. I gave the pile a long look, mostly pine and spruce, with some aspen mixed in. Good burning wood, but it needed to be split and stacked to dry properly. I managed another hour before calling it a day. As I was cleaning up, I noticed Patricia standing at the edge of her property, about 50 yards away. She had her phone out, clearly taking photos or videos of me. I gave her a friendly wave, which she didn't return. That evening, I decided to review the HOA bylaws I had been given when I closed on the house. The document was 43 pages long, single-spaced, covering everything from approved house colors to the maximum height of grass before you'd receive a violation notice. I searched for anything related to noise or wood processing. The only relevant clause stated that excessive noise that disturbs the peace and enjoyment of neighboring properties was prohibited, but it didn't define excessive or reference any specific decibel measurements. The next morning, I woke to find a certified letter wedged in my front door. The return address was from Pinewood Estates, HOA. Inside was a formal violation notice. Dear Mr. Emerson, it has come to our attention that you are conducting commercial logging operations on your property, creating excessive noise pollution that disturbs multiple residents. This activity violates Article 7, Section 3 of the HOA bylaws. You are hereby ordered to cease all wood processing activities immediately. Failure to comply will result in fines of $100 per day and potential legal action. You have been scheduled for a hearing before the HOA board on Friday, October 18th at 7 p.m. at the community center. Sincerely, Patricia Cunningham, HOA President. Commercial logging operations. I was processing firewood for my own use. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the notice 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. This was insane. I had checked the county laws, and the police themselves had confirmed I wasn't violating any noise ordinances. I called my real estate attorney, David Chen, the same one who had handled my closing. His secretary said he was in court but would call me back. While I waited, I did something I probably should have done months ago. I started researching Patricia Cunningham. What I found was enlightening and more than a little disturbing. Patricia had been HOA president for 8 years. In that time, she had filed over 200 violation notices against various homeowners in Pinewood Estates. A quick search of local court records showed she had personally taken 17 homeowners to small claims court for unpaid HOA fines. She had won most of those cases, though a few had been dismissed. More interesting were the forum posts I found on a website dedicated to HOA horror stories. Multiple former Pinewood Estates residents had posted about Patricia, describing her as tyrannical, obsessed with control, and making life miserable for anyone who doesn't follow her exact vision for the neighborhood. One poster claimed Patricia had forced them to repaint their house 3 times because the approved beige wasn't the right shade of beige. David called me back around 3 that afternoon. Lucas, I reviewed the notice you texted me. This is harassment, pure and simple. You're not running a commercial operation, and you're within county noise limits. Here's what we're going to do. First, I want you to hire a certified acoustical engineer to do a proper noise study. We need documentation that shows exactly what decibel levels your wood splitter produces at various distances and times of day. Second, keep a detailed log of all your wood processing activities, dates, times, duration. Third, do not skip that HOA hearing. I'll go with you. What about the order to stop processing wood? Ignore it. They have no legal authority to supersede county ordinances. If they fine you, we'll fight it. But Lucas, I need to be honest, fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. These things can drag on for years. I'm not backing down. I bought this property specifically because it had enough land for me to maintain a degree of self-sufficiency. Heating with wood I process myself is important to me. If I let her push me around on this, what's next? I figured you'd say that. Let me make some calls. I know a good acoustical engineer who does work for construction companies dealing with noise complaints. His reports hold up in court. That Friday, I showed up at the community center at 6:45. David met me in the parking lot, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a suit that probably cost more than my log splitter. The community center was a modest building at the front of the neighborhood with a main hall, a kitchen, and a couple of meeting rooms. The HOA board meeting was held in the main hall. Folding tables were arranged in a U shape at the front, with rows of chairs facing them for residents. Patricia sat at the center of the U, flanked by 4 other board members I had never met. About 15 residents were scattered through the audience chairs, most of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m. She worked through normal business items for the first 20 minutes, approving the previous meeting's minutes, discussing the budget for holiday decorations, addressing a proposal to replace the community mailbox structures. Then she got to what she clearly considered the main event. Item 7 on tonight's agenda: noise violation and unauthorized commercial activity by resident Lucas Emerson of 247 Timber Ridge Road. She looked directly at me, her expression somewhere between smug and hostile. "Mr. Emerson, would you like to address the board?" David stood. "I'm David Chen, Mr. Emerson's legal counsel. Before my client addresses this board, I'd like to clarify several points. First, Mr. Emerson is not engaged in any commercial activity. He is processing firewood for personal use to heat his home. Second, he is operating within all applicable county noise ordinances, as confirmed by the Pine Ridge County Sheriff's Department. Third, this board has no legal authority to prohibit an activity that is explicitly permitted by county law." Patricia's face flushed. "Mr. Chen, the HOA bylaws clearly state that excessive noise is prohibited. Multiple neighbors have complained about the noise from Mr. Emerson's operation." "Then let's talk about those neighbors," David said. "I'd like the names of the residents who complained, as my client has the right to face his accusers." One of the other board members, an older man whose nameplate read Robert Wilkins, leaned forward. "We don't have to disclose that information. Complaints can be made anonymously. Actually, in matters that could result in fines or other penalties, residents do have the right to confront witnesses against them. This is basic due process." "So again, who complained besides Mrs. Cunningham?" The board members exchanged glances. Patricia shuffled through some papers. "We received calls from 3 residents. They wished to remain anonymous." "Did you receive written complaints? Emails? Any documentation besides verbal calls that you claim to have received?" More silence. David opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. "This is a certified noise study conducted by Alpine Acoustical Engineering 2 days ago. Mr. Emerson's wood processing equipment produces an average of 74 decibels at the nearest property line, with peaks reaching 78 decibels. The county allows up to 90 decibels during daytime hours. My client is 16 decibels below the legal threshold. For reference, a vacuum cleaner produces about 70 decibels. A lawn mower produces about 90. Are you planning to ban lawn mowing as well?" I watched several residents in the audience exchange glances and whisper to each other. One woman I recognized from 3 houses down actually smiled. Patricia wasn't backing down. "The county ordinance sets a maximum, not a standard. Just because something is legal doesn't mean it's appropriate for our community. The HOA has the right to impose stricter standards than county law." "Does it?" David pulled out another document. "This is your own HOA bylaws. Article 7, Section 3, states that excessive noise that disturbs the peace and enjoyment of neighboring properties is prohibited." Note that it says excessive. It doesn't define a specific decibel level, and it doesn't claim to supersede county ordinances. In Colorado, HOA rules cannot violate state law or local ordinances. Furthermore, case law establishes that noise restrictions must be reasonable and clearly defined. Your bylaws meet neither standard. Robert Wilkins spoke up again. "The board has the authority to interpret the bylaws and determine what constitutes excessive noise." "Certainly," David agreed, "but that interpretation must be reasonable and consistently applied." "Tell me, Has the HOA ever taken action against residents using lawn mowers, leaf blowers, or chainsaws? All of these produce similar or higher decibel levels than Mr. Emerson's log splitter. Another board member, a woman named Susan Fletcher, raised her hand tentatively. I've used my leaf blower several times this month. It's definitely louder than what I've heard from Mr. Emerson's property. Patricia shot Susan a look that could have frozen fire. That's different. Leaf blowers are standard maintenance equipment. So is a log splitter for someone who heats with wood, I said, speaking for the first time. I'm not doing this for fun. Wood heat is my primary heating source. I have 5 acres and a fireplace that was clearly designed as a functional heating system, not just decoration. I'm doing exactly what this property was designed to accommodate. You could buy pre-split firewood, Patricia said. I could also pay someone to mow my lawn, but I don't see you requiring that. The point is, I have the right to process my own firewood on my own property during legal hours at legal volumes. You don't have to like it, but you do have to accept it. The meeting devolved from there. Patricia insisted the violation stood. David insisted it had no legal basis. Several residents started asking questions about other HOA rules and whether they made sense. One man asked why he had received a violation for parking his boat in his driveway for 3 days when the bylaws only mentioned overnight parking. Another woman questioned why she couldn't plant vegetable gardens in her front yard when flowers were allowed. Patricia gavelled the meeting back to order, clearly flustered. The board will take Mr. Emerson's violation under advisement and issue a ruling within 10 business days. This meeting is adjourned. David and I walked out together. In the parking lot, he said, that went about as well as I expected. She's not going to drop this easily. So what happens now? We wait for their ruling. When they inevitably try to fine you, you'll refuse to pay. They'll likely place a lien on your property or take you to small claims court. Then we present our evidence to a judge who will almost certainly rule in your favor. How much is this going to cost me? David grimaced. If it goes to court? Probably $5,000 to $10,000 in legal fees, maybe more if they drag it out. I'll be honest with you, Lucas. Most people in your situation just give up. They stop whatever activity the HOA is targeting because fighting costs more than compliance. That's what Patricia is counting on. I'm not most people. Over the next week, I continued processing my firewood. Every day from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with a break for lunch, I ran my log splitter. I kept meticulous records: start times, stop times, which sections of the wood pile I was working on. I took photos documenting my progress. And yes, Patricia came out to watch and record me almost every day. On the 8th business day, I received another certified letter. The HOA board had voted 3-2 to uphold the violation and assess a fine of $100 per day, retroactive to the date of the original notice. According to their math, I now owed $1,200. The letter also stated that if I didn't pay within 30 days, they would place a lien on my property and potentially foreclose. That last part was clearly meant to intimidate me. David filed a response on my behalf, denying the violation and informing the HOA that any attempt to collect the fine or place a lien would result in a lawsuit for harassment and abuse of process. Then, things got weird. On a Tuesday morning, I discovered that someone had scattered nails in my driveway. Not just a few dozens of them, spread deliberately to maximize the chance of puncturing tires. I found them before driving over any, thank God, but it took me 2 hours with a magnet and a shop vacuum to clean them all up. I called the sheriff's department and filed a report. The responding deputy, a young guy named Thompson, took photos and bagged a few of the nails as evidence. You have any idea who might have done this? I'm in a dispute with my HOA president, but I don't have proof she was involved. HOA dispute, huh? Thompson shook his head. We get a lot of calls from this neighborhood. Most of them involve Mrs. Cunningham in some way. Between you and me, we've had our eye on her for a while. What do you mean? Thompson glanced around, making sure we were alone. Can't give you specifics, but let's just say you're not the first person to have suspicious incidents during an HOA dispute with her. Nothing we've been able to prove, though. She's careful. I installed security cameras the next day. 4 of them, one covering the driveway, one on the front door, one on the back, and one with a view of my wood processing area. They were wireless, high definition, with night vision and motion detection. They uploaded footage to cloud storage automatically. Good thing I did. 3 days later, at 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I pulled up the camera app and watched as a figure in dark clothing moved around my wood pile. They appeared to be pouring something on the logs. I called 911 immediately. This is Lucas Emerson at 247 Timber Ridge Road. Someone is on my property vandalizing my firewood pile. I have them on camera right now. The dispatcher kept me on the line while units were dispatched. Stay inside, Mr. Emerson. Do not confront the person. Are they still on your property? I watched the screen. Yes, they're still there. They're pouring something from a container onto my wood. Can you describe the person? They're wearing dark clothes and what looks like a hoodie. Medium height, medium build. I can't see their face. The figure finished whatever they were doing and hurried off through the trees that bordered the back of my property. 5 minutes later, 2 patrol cars arrived. Officers Martinez and Rodriguez again, along with 2 others. They searched the area but didn't find anyone. What they did find was that my firewood pile had been doused with used motor oil. The entire 3 cords worth of logs I had spent weeks processing were contaminated. You can't burn wood that's been soaked in motor oil. It releases toxic fumes and can cause chimney fires. Mr. Emerson, you said you have this on camera, Martinez asked. I showed them the footage on my phone. The video clearly showed someone pouring liquid from what looked like a 5-gallon bucket onto different parts of the wood pile. Can you see their face at all? No, they kept their head down. We'll need a copy of that footage. This is criminal mischief, possibly trespassing. Depending on the value of the damaged property, it could be a felony. I did some quick math. 3 cords of split wood delivered was worth about $900. Plus the hours I had put into processing it. The wood itself is probably $900. My time processing it is another 60 hours at least. Rodriguez was examining the wood pile with a flashlight. This is definitely motor oil. You can see it pooling on top of some of the logs. Whoever did this brought multiple containers. This much oil doesn't come from a simple oil change. They took samples of the oil, photographed the damage, and made detailed notes. Before they left, Martinez said, "We're going to investigate this seriously, Mr. Emerson. Between this incident and the nails, someone is targeting you. Do you have any enemies besides the HOA president?" "No. I've lived here 6 months. I barely know anyone besides Patricia Cunningham, and that's only because she makes a point of documenting my every move." After they left, I sat on my front porch watching the sunrise and trying to process what was happening. Someone had just destroyed weeks of work and almost $1,000 worth of firewood. The rational part of my brain said it could be anyone, maybe some teenager playing a prank, maybe a random criminal. But my gut said otherwise. I called David Chen first thing in the morning. He listened to the whole story and then said, "Lucas, this has escalated beyond a simple HOA dispute. If Patricia is behind this, and I'm not saying she is, but if then we're talking about criminal activity, let the police investigate. In the meantime, I'm going to file a restraining order on your behalf. Against Patricia, against the HOA as an entity and Patricia specifically. We'll argue that their harassment has escalated to the point where you have reason to fear for your safety and property. The incidents with the nails and the oil, combined with her documented obsession with your activities, should be enough to get a temporary order. The restraining order hearing was set for the following week. In the meantime, I had to deal with the practical problem of my ruined firewood. I spent a miserable day loading contaminated logs into my truck and hauling them to the county dump. 3 cords of wood gone. It was late October now, and winter was coming fast. I needed to start over. I ordered another delivery of logs, this time having them placed directly next to my workshop where the security cameras had the best coverage. The supplier, a guy named Jerry who ran a tree service company, shook his head when I explained why I needed the new delivery. Man, HOAs are the worst. I've heard some stories, but that's really messed up. Listen, these logs are mostly pine and fir, good burning wood. I'll give you a discount since you're having to replace damaged property. $800 for 3 cords, delivered and stacked where you want them. The logs arrived 2 days before the restraining order hearing. I took photos of everything, documenting the delivery, the placement, the condition of the logs. I was building a paper trail for whatever legal battles lay ahead. The hearing took place at the Pine Ridge County Courthouse on a gray November morning. David and I arrived early and met in the hallway outside the courtroom. Patricia was there with her own attorney, a pinch-faced man named Howard Prescott who specialized in HOA law. Judge Barbara Morrison presided. She was in her 60s, with steel gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had heard every excuse and seen every trick. David presented our case first, walking through the timeline of events. The initial noise complaint, the police confirming no violation, the HOA's continued harassment, the violation notices and fines, and finally the 2 incidents of property damage. Your Honor, my client has done nothing but exercise his legal rights on his own property. In response, the HOA has engaged in a campaign of harassment that has escalated to the point where Mr. Emerson's property is being vandalized. While we cannot definitively prove Mrs. Cunningham's involvement in the criminal acts, the pattern is clear. She has demonstrated an unhealthy obsession with my client's activities, documenting his every move, attempting to impose fines for behavior that is clearly legal, and creating an environment where Mr. Emerson has reasonable fear for his safety and property. Prescott stood to respond. Your Honor, Mrs. Cunningham is simply doing her job as HOA president. She has a responsibility to enforce the community's bylaws and respond to resident complaints. The fact that some unknown third party has vandalized Mr. Emerson's property is terrible, but it has nothing to do with Mrs. Cunningham or the HOA. Really? Judge Morrison looked at Patricia. Mrs. Cunningham, how many times have you personally visited Mr. Emerson's property to observe or document his wood processing activities? Patricia shifted uncomfortably. I haven't visited his property. I've observed from my own property and from the street. How many times? I don't know exactly. Several times a week. For what purpose? To document HOA violations. But the police confirmed there was no noise violation. What exactly were you documenting? Prescott jumped in. Your Honor, Mrs. Cunningham has the right to be on her own property and on public streets. Of course she does, Judge Morrison agreed. But when that behavior becomes obsessive and focuses on one individual who is breaking no laws, it crosses a line into harassment. Mrs. Cunningham, have you taken similar documentation efforts for other residents in the neighborhood? Patricia hesitated. When necessary. How many other residents have you personally documented multiple times per week? Silence. Judge Morrison reviewed the documents in front of her, including stills from my security footage showing Patricia recording me from her property line. I'm going to grant a temporary restraining order. Mrs. Cunningham, you are to stay at least 100 feet from Mr. Emerson and his property. You may not contact him directly. Any HOA business must be conducted through an intermediary or in writing through your attorney. This order will be in effect for 6 months, at which time we can review it. She turned to David. As for the HOA's fines and violation notices, that's a civil matter you'll need to address separately. But Mrs. Cunningham, I strongly suggest you and your board reevaluate your position on this matter. From what I see here, Mr. Emerson is legally processing firewood on his own property during permitted hours at permitted volumes. If you continue to harass him over this, you may find yourselves facing a lawsuit that will cost your HOA far more than any principal is worth. We walked out of the courthouse, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. But David cautioned me. This is just a temporary victory. She can't come near you, but she can still work through the HOA board to make your life difficult. And we still don't know who vandalized your property. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Deputy Thompson from the Sheriff's Department. Mr. Emerson, we may have a break in your vandalism case. Can you come down to the station? At the Sheriff's Department, Thompson led me to a small conference room where Detective Sarah Walsh was waiting. She was maybe 40, with red hair pulled back in a ponytail and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much. Mr. Emerson, thanks for coming in. We've been reviewing the footage from your security cameras, and we got lucky. In one frame, when the suspect was leaving through the trees, they turned their head briefly. The angle caught enough of their face for facial recognition software to work with. She pulled out a photo. Do you recognize this woman? I stared at the image. It was grainy but clear enough. Younger than Patricia, maybe mid-30s with blonde hair. I had seen her before. That's Brenda Halston. She lives 2 houses down from Patricia. I've seen them talking several times. Detective Walsh nodded. We did some background on Mrs. Halston. She's been friends with Mrs. Cunningham for about 5 years. They serve on the HOA board together. Mrs. Halston is the secretary. We brought her in for questioning this morning. And, she confessed, said Mrs. Cunningham convinced her that you were planning to start a commercial firewood business, that it would destroy property values and turn the neighborhood into an industrial area. Mrs. Cunningham allegedly told her that if she didn't take action, no one would. Mrs. Halston claims it was her idea to pour the motor oil, but Mrs. Cunningham knew about it and encouraged her. What about the nails in my driveway? Mrs. Halston denies involvement with that. We're still investigating, but based on Mrs. Halston's statement, we have enough to bring charges against Mrs. Cunningham as an accessory to criminal mischief and conspiracy. We're also looking into additional charges for the nail incident. 2 days later, Patricia Cunningham was arrested. I watched from my window as a patrol car pulled up to her house at 7 in the morning. Officers Martinez and Rodriguez walked to her door. Through my zoom lens, I had bought a decent camera to document everything I could see. Patricia's face go white when they told her why they were there. She was handcuffed and placed in the back of the patrol car while her husband, a quiet man named Gerald, who I had met exactly once, stood in the doorway looking shell-shocked. The neighborhood grapevine went wild. My phone started ringing within hours. Neighbors I had barely spoken to suddenly wanted to tell me their own Patricia Cunningham horror stories. The woman 3 doors down had been fined repeatedly for having the wrong shade of shutters. The couple across the street had received violations for their teenage son's car being parked in front of their house instead of in the garage. Another family had been threatened with legal action for planting herbs in their front flower bed. It turned out that Susan Fletcher, the board member who had spoken up at the meeting, had been waiting for an opportunity to challenge Patricia's leadership. The arrests of both Patricia and Brenda created that opportunity. Susan called for an emergency board meeting to vote Patricia out as president. The vote was unanimous. The criminal case moved forward. Patricia's attorney, Prescott, tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that there was no physical evidence tying Patricia to the vandalism. But Brenda Halston's testimony was damning. She described multiple conversations where Patricia had explicitly encouraged the vandalism, even suggesting the use of motor oil because it would be impossible to clean off the wood. David filed a civil suit on my behalf against both Patricia and the HOA, seeking damages for the destroyed firewood, my time, emotional distress, and legal fees. The HOA's insurance company, realizing they were facing a losing battle, offered a settlement of $20,000. David advised me to take it. "You could probably get more if we went to trial," he said. "But trials are unpredictable and they're expensive. This covers all your actual damages plus a significant amount for your trouble. And the HOA's insurance rates are going to skyrocket after this, which hits them where it hurts." I accepted the settlement. The money was nice, but more satisfying was the complete revision of the HOA bylaws that the new board implemented. Susan Fletcher, now serving as interim president, led a community meeting where residents voted to: first, eliminate all fines for behavior that didn't violate county or state laws. Second, require that any violation notices include specific references to the violated bylaw and evidence of the violation. Third, establish an appeals process where residents could challenge violations before an impartial mediator. Fourth, limit the president's authority to act unilaterally, requiring board approval for any enforcement actions. The new bylaws passed with 87% of residents voting in favor. Patricia and Brenda's criminal cases concluded in February. Brenda took a plea deal: 2 years probation, restitution, and community service. Patricia fought the charges but was convicted of conspiracy to commit criminal mischief and being an accessory after the fact. Judge Morrison sentenced her to 6 months in the county jail, 3 years probation, and ordered her to pay full restitution to me. During the sentencing hearing, Patricia addressed the court: "Your Honor, I was only trying to protect our neighborhood. Property values, quality of life, these things matter. I may have made mistakes in how I approached the situation, but my intentions were good." Judge Morrison was unimpressed. "Mrs. Cunningham, you orchestrated the destruction of another person's property because you disagreed with how they used their own land in a perfectly legal manner. You then lied to police, attempted to cover up your involvement, and showed no remorse until you were caught. Your belief that you know what's best for others doesn't give you the right to break the law. Perhaps time in jail will help you understand that." I attended the sentencing hearing but didn't speak. David had asked if I wanted to give a victim impact statement, but I declined. Watching Patricia's conviction was satisfaction enough. Through all of this, I kept processing firewood. The new 3 cords were split, stacked, and drying nicely. I had enough for this winter and a good start on next year. The log splitter hummed away in my yard, and no one complained. In March, after Patricia had served 2 months of her sentence, I received a letter from her through her attorney. It was short. Mr. Emerson, I want to apologize for my actions. I let my personal views about how the neighborhood should look cloud my judgment. I was wrong to harass you, and I was especially wrong to encourage Brenda to vandalize your property. You were using your land exactly as you had the right to do, and I should have accepted that. I hope you can forgive me someday. Patricia Cunningham. I showed the letter to David. Do you think she means it? He shrugged. Maybe. People do change sometimes, especially after facing real consequences. Or maybe her attorney told her it would look good for her probation hearing. Does it matter? I guess not. Spring came to Colorado, bringing warm weather and the smell of pine. My firewood was well seasoned now, stacked neatly in a covered rack I had built next to my workshop. I wouldn't need it for months, but it was ready when I did. The new HOA board was functioning well under Susan Fletcher's leadership. She had transformed it from Patricia's personal fiefdom into something resembling an actual community organization. They organized neighborhood barbecues, maintained the common areas, and generally stayed out of people's business unless there was a legitimate issue. In April, I was working in my garden. I had planted vegetables in the side yard where the most sun hit when Susan walked up my driveway. "Lucas, got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "The board wanted to thank you officially." I know that sounds weird given everything that happened, but your willingness to stand up to Patricia forced changes that a lot of us had wanted for years. We were all too intimidated or too tired to fight. You showed us it could be done. I didn't do it for the neighborhood. I just wanted to split my firewood in peace. She smiled. I know, but the result is the same. Also, a few of us were talking, and we'd like to formally amend the bylaws to explicitly protect activities like firewood processing, home workshops, and other self-sufficiency projects. We think it aligns with what a lot of people moved here for: a bit of land and the freedom to use it. That sounds good. There's one more thing. Gerald Cunningham is selling their house and moving. He's divorcing Patricia and wants a fresh start somewhere else. The house will be on the market next month. I felt a twinge of sympathy for Gerald. He had seemed like a decent guy trapped in a bad situation. I hope he finds what he's looking for. In May, a young family named the Petersons bought Patricia's old house. They had 2 kids and a golden retriever that loved to run around their yard. The dad, Mike, introduced himself while I was out working on the log splitter one Saturday. "That's a nice setup you have. You heat with wood?" "Yep, mostly pine and fir. The previous owner of this house installed a high-efficiency fireplace that's basically my primary heat source." "Smart." "We're looking to do something similar. Any chance you could show me how the splitter works? I was thinking about getting one." I spent an hour showing Mike the ins and outs of the hydraulic splitter, explaining which wood species split easiest and how to stack logs for optimal drying. It was a pleasant conversation with no undertones of judgment or suspicion. Just 2 neighbors talking about a shared interest. That's what a neighborhood should be. By June, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I went to work each day at the engineering firm in downtown Pine Ridge, where I designed HVAC systems for commercial buildings. Came home, worked in my garden, and sometimes split a few logs just to keep my supply ahead of demand. The HOA left me alone. Neighbors waved when they drove by. It was peaceful. One evening, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold when my phone rang. It was Detective Walsh. "Mr. Emerson, I wanted to update you on your case. We finally identified who scattered those nails in your driveway." "Oh, who was it?" "Patricia Cunningham's husband, Gerald. He came forward last week and confessed. Said he did it at Patricia's request, before the restraining order was issued. He felt guilty after everything came out and wanted to clear his conscience. Is he being charged? The DA is reviewing it, but given that he came forward voluntarily, and he's already going through a divorce and losing basically everything, they'll probably offer a plea deal with probation. He's agreed to pay additional restitution to you for that incident. After she hung up, I sat there thinking about the whole crazy situation. A year ago, I had moved into what seemed like a perfect property in a quiet neighborhood. I had planned to live a simple life, work my job, maintain my house, and heat with wood I processed myself. Instead, I had been dragged through months of harassment, police reports, legal battles, and property damage, all because one person couldn't stand that someone else lived differently than she thought they should. But it was over now. The checks from the settlement and restitution had more than covered my costs and compensated me for my time. More importantly, the HOA had been reformed into something reasonable. Patricia was in jail and would be on probation for years. Brenda had lost her position on the board and was avoiding me completely. Gerald was starting over somewhere else. And me. I was finally living the life I had moved here for. In September, as the aspens started turning gold and the first cold nights arrived, I fired up the log splitter for the fall processing session. I had a new delivery of logs for cords this time, as I wanted to build up a 2-year supply. The hydraulic ram pushed through the wood with its familiar hiss and thump. The smell of fresh cut pine filled the air. Mike from the old Cunningham house walked over with his own log splitter, a smaller electric model. Mind if I work alongside you? I could use some tips on technique. Not at all. Plenty of room. We spent a pleasant afternoon splitting wood, talking about everything from proper log moisture content to the best way to arrange a woodshed for air circulation. 2 guys working on their properties, bothering no one, living their lives. That's all I had ever wanted. That's all most people want, just to be left alone to live on their own land in their own way, as long as they're not hurting anyone or breaking any legitimate laws. It seemed like such a simple concept, but people like Patricia couldn't grasp it. They needed control, needed everyone to conform to their vision of how things should be. Well, Patricia had learned a hard lesson about the limits of control, and I had learned that standing up to bullies, even when it's expensive and exhausting, is worth it. By October, I had 5 cords of wood split, stacked and drying, more than enough for 2 winters. The new security cameras kept watch over my property, though I doubted I'd need them now. The HOA bylaws protected my activities explicitly. The neighborhood had turned over a new leaf under Susan's leadership. On Halloween, the neighborhood organized a trick-or-treating event. Houses that wanted to participate put up orange balloons. I bought candy and put out my balloon, then spent the evening handing out chocolate bars to kids dressed as superheroes and princesses. Parents walked their children door to door, everyone smiling and relaxed. This was what community was supposed to feel like. In November, the first real snow fell. I lit a fire in my fireplace using wood I had processed myself, and sat watching the flames dance while the wind howled outside. The house was warm. The logs burned clean and hot, exactly as they should. All that work, all that conflict, had been worth it for this moment of self-sufficient comfort. I thought about Patricia sometimes, serving out the remainder of her sentence. I wondered if she had really changed, or if she would go right back to her controlling ways once she was released. I hoped she had learned something, but I knew people often don't change, even after serious consequences. But that wasn't my problem anymore. In December, I received the final payment from Gerald Cunningham, $2,000 in restitution for the nail incident. The check came with a note. "Mr. Emerson, I'm sorry for my part in what happened. I should have stood up to Patricia years ago instead of enabling her behavior. I hope you can enjoy your property in peace now. Best wishes, Gerald." I deposited the check and donated half of it to a local organization that helped people navigate HOA disputes. They provided free legal consultations and helped homeowners understand their rights. If my experience could help others avoid similar situations, that was worth something. Christmas came, and my parents drove up from Boulder to visit. Dad admired my wood processing setup, the neat stacks of split logs, and the efficient system I had developed. "You learned well," he said. "This is exactly how we used to do it when I was growing up. Self-sufficiency matters. You stood your ground, and I'm proud of you." As the year ended and a new one began, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. I had moved to Pine Ridge looking for a peaceful place to live. Instead, I had found conflict, harassment, and legal battles. But through all of that, I had also found strength I didn't know I had, learned valuable lessons about standing up for principle, and ultimately helped reform a broken system that had been hurting people for years. The firewood that had started all of this sat in neat cords by my workshop, ready to keep me warm through however many winters it took to burn through it all. Every log represented a small victory over Patricia's harassment, over an overreaching HOA, and over the temptation to just give up and comply with unreasonable demands. In February, Mike and I were both out splitting wood on a Saturday afternoon when a car pulled up. A man in his 50s got out and walked over. "Excuse me, I'm looking at houses in the neighborhood. Mind if I ask you a question?" "Sure," I said. "I work from home and I'm considering buying the house at the end of the street. How's the HOA here? Are they reasonable?" Mike and I exchanged a glance and I smiled. "Actually, they're one of the better ones now. They went through some changes recently. As long as you're not breaking any actual laws, they pretty much leave you alone." "Really? That's unusual." My current HOA fines people for having their garbage cans visible from the street for more than 2 hours on collection day. "This one used to be like that," Mike said, "but the old board got replaced. The new one is much better. They focus on actual community issues and stay out of people's personal business." "What changed?" I gestured to my wood pile. "Long story, but basically someone stood up to them when they overstepped and it forced reforms. You should read the bylaws before buying, but they're reasonable now." The man smiled. "That's good to hear. I'm so tired of HOAs that act like homeowner Gestapo. I just want a place where I can live in peace." "Don't we all?" I said. After he left, Mike laughed. "You made that sound a lot simpler than it was." "Aren't you going to tell him about the arrests and the lawsuits?" "Why? That's over and done with. The HOA is fixed now. Let him enjoy moving in without all that baggage hanging over him. Besides, maybe hearing that things are good now will be a selling point for the neighborhood." "Fair enough. Hand me that wedge, would you?" We went back to splitting wood, the steady rhythm of hydraulic rams and splitting logs filling the cool afternoon air. Just two neighbors working on their properties, living their lives, bothering no one. It was everything I had wanted when I moved here. It had taken a year of conflict, thousands of dollars in legal fees, security cameras, police reports, and a reformation of the entire HOA structure to achieve it. But now it was real and sustainable. That night, I lit another fire with my processed wood and sat reading a book about sustainable living. The flames crackled softly. The house was warm. Outside, snow fell gently in the darkness, blanketing the neighborhood in white. My phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. "Saw the news that Patricia was released today. Thought you should know. Let me know if there are any issues." I thought about that for a moment, then texted back, "Thanks for letting me know. I hope she's learned something and can move on with her life." And I meant it. I didn't harbor any ongoing anger toward Patricia. She had been wrong, she had harassed me, she had even encouraged destruction of my property. But she had faced consequences, real, serious consequences that had cost her months of her life, her position, her reputation, and her marriage. That was enough. I didn't need to carry around resentment. Besides, the restraining order was still in effect for another few months. She couldn't come near me even if she wanted to. In March, the HOA held its annual meeting. Susan Fletcher announced she would be stepping down as president at the end of her term, having served for a year. Under her leadership, the HOA had paid out the settlement to me, revised the bylaws, implemented new oversight procedures, and generally transformed the culture of the organization. A new slate of candidates ran for the board positions. All of them ran on platforms of minimal interference and community building rather than rule enforcement. The woman who won the presidency was a retired teacher named Margaret Chen, no relation to my attorney, who promised to focus on organizing community events and maintaining common areas while leaving homeowners alone. It was a far cry from Patricia's regime. In April, I was working in my garden when a car pulled up and Patricia got out. She stayed on the street, well beyond the 100 feet required by the restraining order, and called out, "Mr. Emerson, could I talk to you for a moment? I'll stay right here." I walked to the edge of my property. "What do you need, Patricia?" She looked different, older, tired, humbled. "I wanted to apologize in person. The letter I sent through my attorney was sincere, but I thought you deserved to hear it directly. What I did to you was wrong. I was so focused on what I thought the neighborhood should be that I lost sight of people's rights and basic decency. You were just trying to live your life, and I turned it into a nightmare. I'm sorry." I studied her for a long moment. "I appreciate you saying that. I'm moving away. Gerald and I are divorced, and I've accepted a job in Arizona. I wanted to apologize before I left. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed to say it. Patricia, I hope you find peace wherever you're going. And I hope you've learned that people are allowed to live differently than you think they should, as long as they're not hurting anyone." "I have. It was an expensive lesson, but I've learned it." She hesitated. "For what it's worth, your wood pile looks good. You clearly know what you're doing." I actually smiled at that. "Thanks. Good luck in Arizona." She drove away, and I went back to my garden. That would probably be the last time I ever saw Patricia Cunningham. She had been the antagonist in one of the most stressful periods of my life, but she was also just a person who had made bad choices and was now trying to move forward. I could respect that. May brought warm weather and the annual community barbecue, now organized by the reformed HOA. They held it in the common area near the community center. Half the neighborhood showed up. Mike and his family were there. Susan Fletcher was there with her husband. Margaret Chen, the new HOA president, gave a brief speech about community values and respecting each other's differences. I brought burgers and stayed for a couple of hours, talking with neighbors about everything from gardening tips to the best places to hike in the mountains nearby. No one mentioned firewood processing or noise complaints or any of the drama from the previous year. It was just people being neighborly. As the sun set and the barbecue wound down, Margaret Chen approached me. "Lucas, I wanted to thank you. I know the past year was difficult for you, but the changes that resulted have made this a much better place to live. We're now one of the most sought-after neighborhoods in Pine Ridge because word has gotten out that our HOA is actually reasonable. I'm glad something good came out of it. More than you know. Several other HOAs in the county have reached out asking about our revised bylaws. We're becoming a model for how these organizations should function, all because you refused to back down when you were in the right. That night, splitting a few logs to maintain my supply, I thought about the strange journey the past year had been. I had never wanted to be the face of HOA reform or a test case for homeowner rights. I had just wanted to heat my house with wood I processed myself. But sometimes standing up for a simple principle ripples out in unexpected ways. My willingness to fight Patricia's overreach hadn't just protected my own rights, it had reformed an entire organization, and apparently was influencing other HOAs across the county. The log splitter hissed and thumped, cutting through a thick piece of pine. The smell of fresh wood filled the air. My security cameras watched over everything, though I barely checked them anymore. The neighborhood was peaceful. The HOA was reasonable. Life was good. In June, David Chen called with news. "Lucas, I thought you'd want to know. The Colorado legislature just passed a new law regulating HOA enforcement powers. It requires HOAs to show that any rule they enforce is reasonable, necessary, and doesn't contradict local ordinances. It also establishes penalties for HOA board members who abuse their authority. Your case was actually cited in the legislative debate as an example of why the law was needed." "Really? Really?" "One of the state representatives lives in Pine Ridge and heard about what happened to you. He introduced the bill and it passed with bipartisan support. It won't stop all HOA abuse, but it should help." After we hung up, I sat on my porch watching the mountains turn purple in the evening light. A year ago, I had been stressed, harassed, and facing down an organization that seemed determined to make my life miserable. Now, not only was my own situation resolved, but laws had changed to protect other homeowners from similar abuse. All because I wouldn't stop splitting firewood. The story could have ended there, with everything neatly resolved and lessons learned. But life doesn't always wrap up that cleanly. In July, I was featured in a local newspaper article about the new HOA reform law. The reporter interviewed me about my experience, and the article ran with a photo of me standing next to my log splitter and carefully stacked wood piles. The headline read, "Local homeowners fight for right to process firewood leads to statewide HOA reform." The article went viral, at least locally. I started getting calls and emails from homeowners across Colorado who were dealing with their own HOA nightmares. A woman in Denver was being fined for having solar panels. A man in Boulder was facing a lawsuit for keeping chickens. A family in Colorado Springs had received violations for planting a vegetable garden in their front yard. I couldn't help them all, but I forwarded their information to David Chen, and to the organization I had donated to that helped homeowners with HOA disputes. Some of them, I simply advised to document everything, know their rights, and not back down if they were in the right. In August, I was invited to speak at a community meeting in Fort Collins about HOA reform. I almost declined. Public speaking wasn't really my thing, but David convinced me that my story could help others. So I drove up to Fort Collins on a Tuesday evening and spoke to a room of about 50 homeowners who were organizing to reform their own HOA. I told them my story, emphasizing the importance of documentation, knowing local ordinances, and being willing to fight when you're in the right. "The thing is," I said, "most people give up. They comply with unreasonable demands because fighting is expensive and exhausting. That's what bullies count on. But if you stand your ground, document everything, and show that you're following the law, you can win. And more importantly, you can force changes that help everyone." After the talk, people came up to share their own stories and ask advice. I stayed for 2 hours, listening and offering what help I could. Driving home that night, I felt a strange sense of purpose. I hadn't set out to become some kind of homeowner rights advocate, but here I was. September brought fall colors and the start of another wood processing season. I had learned my lessons and refined my system. The security cameras stayed up, though they mainly just recorded birds and the occasional deer. The log splitter ran during daylight hours, well within legal limits. My stacks of split wood grew steadily. Mike had bought his own log splitter and was building up his own supply. We often worked side by side on weekend afternoons, two neighbors pursuing the same practical goal. His kids sometimes helped, learning the same lessons my father had taught me about self-sufficiency and the satisfaction of doing practical work. In October, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "Thank you." Inside was a message from Gerald Cunningham. "Mr. Emerson, I wanted to let you know that I've settled in New Mexico and started over. The divorce was hard, but it was necessary. I spent too many years enabling Patricia's controlling behavior because it was easier than confronting her. Your willingness to stand up to her, even when it cost you time and money, taught me something important. I should have done the same years ago. I'm in therapy now, working on understanding why I let things get so bad. Thank you for being the catalyst for change, even though I know that wasn't your intention. I hope your wood supply is treating you well. Gerald." I wrote back a brief reply, wishing him well and thanking him for his honesty. It was a small moment of closure on a story that had dominated a year of my life. As winter approached, and I lit fires with wood I had processed myself, I reflected on everything that had happened. A simple desire to split my own firewood had led to police reports, lawsuits, arrests, HOA reform, state legislation, and apparently some kind of minor fame as a homeowner rights advocate. All I had wanted was to live quietly on my property and heat my house with wood I cut and split myself. The journey to achieve that simple goal had been far more complicated than I ever imagined, but the destination was worth it. The fire crackled in my fireplace, filling the house with warmth. Outside, the first snow of the season fell softly. My wood supply was secure for this winter and the next. The HOA left me alone. Life was peaceful, and somewhere in New Mexico, Gerald Cunningham was starting over. Somewhere in Arizona, Patricia Cunningham was hopefully learning to let go of control. Somewhere in Fort Collins, homeowners were organizing to reform their HOA based on lessons learned from my experience. The ripples kept spreading, but for me, the story was simple. I could split my firewood in peace. That's all I had ever wanted. And finally, that's exactly what I had.